Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Token City Show. Today, we have with us a distinguished guest. His name is Joachim Schwerin. He is principal economist at the EU Commission, in particular in the unit responsible for digital transformation of industry within the Directorate General Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, commonly known as DG GROW. He is responsible for developing the policy approach of DG GROW towards the token economy as it relates to the industry and SMEs. Hello, Joachim, and welcome back.
Javier, thank you so much. Buenas tardes to everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be back here.
Buenas tardes to you. Let's get to it, and I would like to start with the commitment of the European Commission to the vision of a tokenized economy. We know here at Token City that you are engaged with the tokenized economy vision, and we would like to hear all about it.
Thanks very much to give me the opportunity to take up this important topic. And when I prepared our discussion here at the show, I took a look at what we discussed last year. And last year, I had the pleasure to be in your show and explain all about the history behind the European Commission's engagement towards tokenization, how it emerged in the financial crisis, and what the background is of this. And I'm very happy to say that now, being here 1 year later, that we have advanced further on this path and that a number of exciting things can happen. But let me briefly get back, as you asked, to the basics. We see tokenization as a fundamental part of the future of our societies, not only in economic terms, but also in social terms, in democratic terms. Tokenization is basically to put things that you have in physical existence into a digital domain. So basically, you digitize assets, and then you can transfer the value safely using blockchain technology. And this is something that has driven us already for the last 10 years, because we see a lot of opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises, for startups, but for citizens in general, to be much more in control of their own assets, deciding where the assets should go to, but also be able to reap the benefits. And that not only for standard or small products, but look at tokenization in a broader term, that, for example, when you look to buildings, to real estate, but also to anything that has a higher value, you can digitize that, you can tokenize it, you can fractionalize it, which means that a lot of people can form part of the ownership and governance of one asset. And that, to us, is a game changer for society. And I'm very happy to see that now there are a lot of use cases popping up all over the world, also in Europe. For example, I just mentioned housing. There is an emergence of decentralized autonomous organizations for social housing, where people share the governance of, for example, a house to make it more accessible, to make the rent more democratically controlled, and many other things like that. So tokenization in every part of the economy, in every part of the society, for us is a very important element. And I can only congratulate you, not only for the show, but also for your work in general, to put this really to the attention of people who should be much more aware of the opportunities.
Thank you so much, Joachim. On that note, for a company like Token City, there's a key piece of regulation at the moment at the EU level that is called the pilot regime. It is not as well known as the MiCA regulation, but we believe it is central to what you just described. And I would like you to give our audience an overview of what the pilot regime is, and also give us a pulse on the interest that it's generating.
That's a very valid point, because indeed, Ravi, as you say, the pilot regime is very much under the radar normally of news coverage, and not many people know about this. When we designed the MiCA regulation, we put it into a whole package, which at the time we called the Digital Finance Package. And the Digital Finance Package consists of a lot of measures, where the markets and crypto asset regulation is one, but also there are measures on, for example, cybersecurity regarding financial markets, but also many other things, retail payments, etc. And one additional element is a pilot regime. A pilot regime is a sort of sandbox, which means it is an area for experimentation for new business models. But the DLT pilot regime is specifically limited to two use cases: multilateral trading platforms and DLT settlement systems. And the idea behind that is to enable, in a sort of traditionally regulated domain, more liberal space for innovation for transactions on these two types of platforms or settlement systems that trade DLT-based assets, so tokenized assets, essentially. And what the purpose of the thing is to give existing market players, but also new market players that come into the business, the opportunity to test and experiment for a limited number of years and with certain thresholds, the functionality of their blockchain-based solutions for blockchain digital asset management, as is also, of course, the activity of Token City. Now, this system went into operation. It started in March of last year, so basically it's now operational for 10 months. And it was originally designed 4 or 5 years ago as a sort of innovative space, but I'm very open on this. We also, of course, at the time note the shortcomings, because when you compare it with systems that have since emerged in terms of DLT sandboxes, for example, in the UK, our DLT sandbox is relatively limited in size. And also, we have a lot of detailed technical questions to resolve. For example, one of our European regulatory bodies, the ESMA, has just in October published a series of standards that should make the functionality of the sandbox easier, the reporting standards and other things. I must say that there is a big interest in theory, and that's always the problem, Javier, to this sandbox. But in practical terms, we have seen a limited number of companies really going towards the sandbox. There's an interest from big traditional players who are already in the market to experiment with blockchain. What they often say is that the scope of the sandbox of the DLT pilot system is too small for their purposes, because indeed it's not about earning money, it's not about the mass market, it's really about trying out new technology and see how it works. Whereas the true startups that have not yet operated the trading facilities tell us that it is still too much regulated. At the end of the day, the DLT pilot regime has a limited number of exceptions from existing regulation like MiFID and others, but it of course keeps the biggest part of existing regulation, and that means when you enter the market, you have a lot of requirements to fulfill. So that is something that we note at the moment that is a question mark behind the system, also because we have said that we evaluate that in 3 years and it has a duration of 5 years. So the question is what happens afterwards, which is also very important for companies that enter this pilot regime. We have, as the European Commission said, we would like to ensure the continuity, to have this longer, but we will depend on political decisions that will be taken after the summer when we have the new policy cycle. You know that we have a very important election year in many countries, also at the European level this year. In June, we have the European Parliament elections. Then in the second half of the year comes a new 5-year policy cycle with a new European Commission. And then we also have a new work program. And this will then be the moment where we have to assess what we might do in the future with the pilot regime. I must say that I find it a very good idea, of course, but the speed of market development on tokenization and on digitization of securities and assets already shows that this pilot regime was organized too narrowly, and that probably we have to do something to increase the uptake. Last remark, Javier, because I know it's very important in practical terms, also in Spain. A pilot regime, like a sandbox, is a space for co-learning from the public and the private sides. So the companies and the regulators must come together to see together how they can best launch and improve a business model. And this requires a lot of education, really at the individual basis of those people, not only at the European level, but also in Spain, that are responsible for regulation, to really understand the opportunities. And that is something where we need to focus stronger in the future to see that everyone really sees the merit in this and then also supports companies like Token City to develop their use cases.
Yep. I fully agree with your last statement, and it does make sense that the bigger players, which, as you say, would have loved a bigger scope to benefit more from applying blockchain technology, they have the means to go through the regulatory requirements. Smaller players may have the same or even bigger interest, but it's not as easy to deal with that. Yeah. So now switching a little bit gears, touching on MiCA, European Central Bank's President Christine Lagarde at the end of 2022 said that a second MiCA regulation might be necessary. So I wanted to ask you your opinion on this, and if you think if this is actually that is something that is being worked on.
Javier, that's a tricky question in a way, and as always, I give you my personal opinion and not necessarily that of the European Commission or anyone else. Everyone is, of course, entitled to their opinion. But I would say there's a couple of reasons that speak, in my opinion, against such a proposal. The first thing is we have to see what could a second MiCA regulation actually be. The MiCA regulation is already a very liberal and innovative regulation, at least as regards the exemptions and the utility token side, that is located below MiFID. So it's not securities, but it is mainly on forms of tokens that only require less regulation because there are less risks. There are certain exceptions on stablecoins, but for most tokens, this applies. So for me, a natural next step would be to look in an even more decentralized space like the DeFi space, which we have excluded from MiCA. Now, if I take financial regulation seriously, traditional financial regulation is about addressing the intermediaries, is about addressing the counterparty. When you look at even more decentralized forms below the MiCA tokens, you would end up in situations where you don't have an intermediary, where you don't have a counterparty, because in a more decentralized space, you are discussing finance, peer-to-peer finance among collectives where you have a different form of organization. And in my personal opinion, when we really think about DeFi, the term DeFi regulation, which is what most people think a MiCA 2.0 should be, is a contradiction in terms, because either you have DeFi or you have regulation. But I don't see traditional regulation in the DeFi space. They're not merited, in my opinion, by the risk. They're not merited by the size of the market that we see now. And there are other instruments that you could address them with. What is correct is that the European Commission, and this is, of course, in the public domain, is writing in the course of the year a report on DeFi, which, as said, many people consider to be a first step towards a future second MiCA regulation. This is not the case. We have published a year ago a paper on information symmetries and the information structure on DeFi markets. We will come up with a report. And then it will be for the next commission. I've just explained that we will come to a new 5-year cycle at the end of this year to see what is in the work program. At the moment, our work program is finished. We do not have a political mandate for a next MiCA regulation. We do not have a political mandate to move in towards the regulation of the more decentralized space. And I would find it very difficult to see why this should change in the course of the year, given what we've just discussed. Last remark, when you talk to policymakers and politicians now in Europe, and I have a lot of discussions with members of the European Parliament, I have discussions with the current Council presidency after the Spanish one. Now it's the Belgian Council presidency that has for the first time put a big focus on blockchain, actually, which is positive. Everyone tells me that we have so much regulation now that we created over the last years that we need to give businesses more breathing space. And that brings us also a little bit back to the pilot regime, Javier, that we talked about a few minutes ago. All these regulations are now in place. MiCA is active, and in the course of this year, we come with all the technical standards and the detailed implementation. We have the pilot regime, we have transfer of funds, we have the new AML regime, we have all these pieces of regulation. People are a little bit fed up with new regulation. What most politicians now rightly think, and I hope that also regulators will understand that is we now need to see how that can be put into operation, how that can better work on the market, how we can educate everyone and how companies can take it up better than before. That is not a need for new regulation. That is a need for existing regulation to work better in practice. And therefore, my personal opinion is we do not need a next MiCA regulation.
Understood. And I have to say that I find your opinion very refreshing from the point of view of a business. And taking into account what you just explained during the last question, your last response, I would like to ask you about something that I personally find intriguing, which is the interest in some of the bigger financial players in the space who are very active in the research and also in the interest they show in wanting to apply and benefit from blockchain technology. All of the bigger players in the world are actually doing that. One of them that I have here is JP Morgan. I recently was reading a report that they issued exploring the idea of applying DeFi protocols to traditional institutional finance. That's what they call it, institutional DeFi, meaning the application by financial institutions of DeFi protocols with traditional finance safeguards. What do you think about this? How, in the long term, how realistic or doable would you say this is in the context of the EU?
Javier, I would like to distinguish between two things. First of all, I find it very good if the institutional investors, if the big companies more come into the crypto markets, also enabled by more liberal regulation, hopefully in other parts of the world, because that creates volume, that creates size. So whereas in my opinion, the innovation comes from the startups, comes from the smaller decentralized players, we have seen that the crypto markets are evolving very quickly, but that they are, of course, still far below any of the levels that traditional financial and capital markets have. So if you were to even get 1% of the assets that institutional investors hold into the crypto space, and this is what we're talking about now. I have regular discussions with JP Morgan, but also with the others, and I see their interest in the blockchain space. So to get a certain volume into these markets would be immensely positive, in my opinion, for the whole crypto and token space, because it would create more certainty and it would give a very welcome push also to scale up a lot of businesses. And I think with the decision that the SEC in the US has taken recently, for example, on the Bitcoin ETF, but other things, at least in this part of the world, that will be increasing. In Europe, we have a slightly different system, but of course, there also in countries like Luxembourg and others, we see that JP Morgan and other companies are very active in launching their projects, and this is certainly welcome. Where I have my personal doubts is the term that you use on institutional DeFi, because whereas institutional investment is certainly merited and useful, and DeFi is a very interesting concept, of course, to democratize markets. DeFi by nature is decentralized. Institutional investors, fully regulated by default, are centralized. So that's again the old divide between centralized and decentralized. And I think that there should be a certain convergence. I absolutely agree that it's helpful for traditional players, for big institutional investors to explore the blockchain space. And it would also be helpful for a number of reasons, as I said, for the decentralized space. But whether you can still call that DeFi is an open question to me. I have a different opinion from DeFi self-organization in terms also of governance than I see in the traditional regulated domain. This being said, this is undoubtedly a development that will take place. And I will give you one additional little example. I am in discussion with the leading fund governance bodies in the world as regards the use of technology for governing public funds. And if you see that in traditional public funds, 10 or 20% of the money that you have in a fund disappears when you put it forward to the final recipients, because the system has its flaws, the system is not transparent, there are not really safeguards against losing a little bit money here or there. There, the use of blockchain can create into much more security and much better resource allocation between the fund, that has the money available and the final recipient. And this is now being recognized by the leading fund operators. So we will see blockchain technology moving much more in the traditional financial domain. We will see it much more being taken up not only by institutional investors, but also family offices and others. Where I have my doubt, but that is only a semantic problem, is that we call it DeFi, but the process that you describe is absolutely happening.
Yeah. Understood. I agree that the term DeFi, I was mainly referring to basically applying some of those protocols that are so innovative, so to speak, and that we don't really find in the traditional sector. But I understand. Okay, and I would like to ask you one last question. Like as you know, of course, it was recently announced that the project for the digital euro entered the preparation phase. It should be noted that this doesn't mean that there will be a digital euro. It's another phase in the discussions. But I would like to ask you from a tokenization perspective, what you would like to see in the case of an eventual implementation of a European CBDC, central bank digital currency?
That's a very good question indeed. And if you look at the background of this, you of course see that there have been two main reasons why the digital euro discussion came about. First of all, it's the international dimension. Nearly every central bank now globally is experimenting with CBDCs. And there was the opinion, to which I agree, that in Europe we should do the same. And secondly, that people have the view that there is less and less use of cash, to which I disagree. It is very often more difficult to pay with cash, but there's certainly a big demand. But less cash would mean that there is less direct influence of the central banks as regards the money supply. And that created the discussion on the digital euro that now, after 2 years of an exploration phase, has moved since the 1st of November into the next phase that you have correctly described. And as you also said, there has not yet been a decision to actually issue a digital euro. That will be a political decision that needs to be taken later. At the moment, it's only the preparation of what is needed from an infrastructure perspective, but also many other organizational things. So for the next 4 or 5 years, we will certainly not have anything that looks like a digital euro. And if we get a digital euro, perhaps at one stage, if you follow the current discussions, the use case would be rather limited because at the moment it's mainly discussed as the retail version. Now, this being said, the proposal that the European Commission has published half a year ago on the legal basis for the digital euro, accompanied actually by the legal basis for cash to also maintain the use of cash, but on the digital euro keeps the door open for programmable versions of a digital euro. So basically, there has been no decision taken whether that really is an account-based or a tokenized system. I have much more sympathy for a tokenized system because what we actually need is not a form of digital cash that is not really cash because the privacy cannot be guaranteed. But what we need is the ability for example, micropayments, for tokenized value transactions in the machine-to-machine economy, in Web3 environments, in the metaverse, which needs to have a form of digital money which is tokenized and therefore completely different than the traditional public wallet-based systems. And this is a decision that will also have to be taken in the future. My take is that the private markets will move much faster forward with the token-based solutions than the public domain will do with the digital euro for very good reasons. And therefore, I think it's nice to see the discussion with the digital euro perhaps. But for the foreseeable future, all the practical solutions for companies will be in the private tokenization space and not with the digital euro.
Understood. I said before that that was my last question, but I would also like to ask you, you were mentioning the opportunity that we have in the European Union to I don't want to use the term disrupt, but your vision of a CBDC is actually what I think would be the most beneficial, and I think that's almost inarguable. So on that note, I would like to ask you, given the population that we have, our GDP here in the EU, you could say that we are the leading region in blockchain in blockchain now, I'm not, I hesitate to say adoption, but at least in pushing it, trying to push it forward, right? So,
Yep.
particularly compared to the situation in the U.S., where it's a little bit tricky in terms of legal terms, what do you think? Do you think that we could say we are the global leaders right now in blockchain, in the blockchain space? And if so, what could we do to consolidate that?
I would say that while it has never been our ambition to be, let's say, the number one compared to others, we just want to do what we think is useful. But when it comes to blockchain applications in the public domain as regards financial regulation or as regards also real economy application, think of the anti-counterfeiting system that I discussed in our last discussion here on the show and many other things. We are certainly in the world from the big economic spaces, the one that has moved forward most with the implementation of blockchain solutions. Now, if you look at decentralized crypto applications, you see that there is, given the percentage of the population that uses such solutions on their smartphones, etc., that there are other parts of the world that are much more advanced, in Asia, but also in Africa, in Central and South America, etc. So it always depends, I think, on how you look at the market. But generally speaking, as you mentioned, the US, everyone also in the US, and I have a lot of discussions with them, is of course waiting for the result of the US elections at the end of the year. My personal opinion is that I don't think that too much will change if you look at who will run for the presidency, either solution. But also there is a geopolitical development which is going away from using the dollar as the world's leading global currency. The dollar is in steep decline as regards its global usage, and other parts of the world are catching up in forms of bringing new forms of currencies, securities, assets, commodity-based solutions, where there will be much more competition in the future as regards the payment systems and the financial systems. And this is very interesting to see because that pushes a lot of new innovation into the market. So while we have done quite a few good things, I would say, in the last couple of years, to foster blockchain adoption, the speed of innovation is so big that in 3-5 years that can look completely differently. And that remains a daily reminder for us, Javier, but also for everyone who is listening to the show, that this is the time actually to think about the next step in implementing solutions. And I can only offer an invitation from our side: when you have an interesting project, when you have also a practical issue, it's good to inform us, because we want to drive the market forward, but from a bottom-up perspective that is really benefiting everyone in the companies, from the citizens as well. And we have to work very, very, very hard over the next years in order to keep the position that we have earned ourselves over the last 10 years.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Joachim. I wanted to also ask you if there's anything you would like to add before we say goodbye.
I would just give a big round of applause from myself, but also from us here, from the perspective of what companies and representatives like you, but also those companies that you work with, are doing in Spain. We see that as a very big confirmation of how useful this technology can be. And I know from our discussions, but also from other discussions, how frustrating it can be sometimes when you are confronted with all the practical problems. But each and every small step that you take to bring your business forward is also a learning effect, a positive learning effect for other businesses in Europe to follow that and to make the market bigger. So congratulations, not only for what you do, but also for this show, because I think we need many more formats like this to really have that discussion in the open domain.
Thank you so much, Joachim. We really work hard. We are very happy to have you, such a representative, a great representative of the European Commission and the commitment from the European Commission with the tokenized economy. That's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Joachim. We hope to have you back in the show.
Thank you so much, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Okay, so that has been all for today. That was Joachim Schwerin, Principal Economist at the European Commission. We hope you have enjoyed the show. Thank you and good night.